Hello everyone, welcome to UI5Con 2024, and it breaks my heart a little bit because this is the last session of today, but it's not the last session of the Code Connect because tomorrow there is ABAP so the week is not over, but after this talk the sessions are over and we have the after party. And also, of course, a warm welcome to everyone who's dialed in remotely. So this session, as usual, contains a Q&A, and if you have comments, questions, put it into the chat, and I can bring it on stage. And by the way, on stage with me is Mike Zaschka. He's been here already. He was here last year. That's when we met the first time. And it's a great pleasure to have you here again. He is Business Unit Lead Cloud Consulting at P36. And it's not his birthday today, so last year it was a special day for you. What do I still know about you? You have 3 kids. Did that change?
No.
You have 2 dogs. Did that change?
No.
Did you get a cat since then?
No.
You plan on getting one?
It's 5 UI5, so it's enough.
It's enough? Okay.
2 dogs, 3 kids, it's enough.
Who of you heard him speak last year? Oh, that's quite a lot. So they all came back for you. And we make dreams come true. So give it up, give a round of applause for Modern JavaScript and UI5 Part 2 with Mike. Enjoy.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm really glad to be here again. And so first of all, I changed the name of the talk. So it was initially Modern JavaScript and UI5 2024 edition or something, but this kind of made an assumption or brought up an assumption that there will be the next version next year, but that won't happen. So this will be the last talk on this topic, but nevertheless I felt the need that there is still something to say on that topic, even if I was here last year and already talked much about it. So, let's start. In last year's talk, I tried to discuss this a little bit. So now you see, okay. To add some humor to this, and I try to do this this time again. Okay. So actually, I'm really happy that many of you have been here last year, because I don't want to rephrase everything I said. So I will actually continue this discussion, but to just briefly summarize this, actually the reason why I'm here and talking about this is that it's based on a little bit of historical reasons. Because UI5 has been brought to life at a time where there were different world, JavaScript has been a different world. So there was a standard called ECMAScript 5 at that time, and the UI5 guys needed to invent something or actually build the framework based on that standard. But over time, JavaScript changed, and it actually changed a lot. And UI5 had the idea to be stable all the time, and to not really change anything, right? That's a positive thing, but it's also a negative thing because you kind of get behind of all the developments that happen in that time. So I tried to put a finger on this and said, look, there's a really huge gap now of like 10 years. And if you look in the official UI5 documentation, you will not find anything from those last 10 years. So I think we should talk about this. So I also got into the motivation on why it's important for you to actually be aware of this and what is in for you if you look over the boundaries of UI5 into the real JavaScript or into the full JavaScript world and see those things that happen there and apply them to your UI5 application. So I grabbed one snippet from the official documentation and applied some stuff that is there. And we can actually see that it reduced the amount of code that you need to write of about 30%. And things were a lot easier to read, a lot easier to write, to maintain, and stuff like this. And I've also shown that it's pretty easy to use. So there's no real burden in applying those modern JavaScript to your UI5 application. And that's why you should do it. I then gave some examples, so I got into some technical details. I talked a little bit about let const, string literals, error functions, classes, option chaining, destructuring, and stuff like this. And yeah, that was last year. This year, I will have a much shorter agenda, but I think I will still need all the time that I have. And I want to discuss two things, or actually three things. The first is the case of modern JavaScript. I never really gave a definition of what modern JavaScript really means, so we'll look into this. I will look at the importance of modern JavaScript, not for you or for us as developers, but I think it's also really relevant for UI5 in general. And I mean, we heard lots about this in today's talks, which was super interesting, but we'll get into this. And then in the last section, we will actually look at some technical details, and this will be like promises and arrays. Okay, so let's go into this. And let's start with the case of modern JavaScript and what modern actually means. When you look this up, you will actually find the definition of modern means designed and made using the most recent ideas and methods. So that's a definition, but also very vague, because what does most recent mean? So it's really something that is not really specific. And yeah, you can read it, yes. So when I look at modern JavaScript, or at the term modern or most recent, then it's kind of dependent of who's looking at, so the viewpoint, the knowledge that you have, and also the time when you look at this, right? So that's an example, and actually I try to use AI to make me younger, but it's actually, I did not look that way in 2008. And just a simple example. So I have a JavaScript, I have a simple list with some people, and I want to group them by age, right? So in 2008, with ECMAScript 5 around, I would have done it this way. So I would create a variable. Can I use this? Yes. Create a variable, then use a for loop where I count to the length of the list and then go over it and group things. Over time, this might have changed. So in 2016, there was ECMAScript 6 around, and potentially I would not have used the same var statement, for statement, but I would use for off, because that's a little bit nicer to use. And potentially I would have used const instead of var, because that var is not so good if you use it. So fast forward to 2020, potentially, even if it's a longer round, but my knowledge expanded, I potentially would have used reduce, because then I can omit this variable to have around and just, yeah, make it functional style to actually just use reduce to return the final grouped object. Or in 2024, I would just use object group by and be done, because I know now ECMAScript 2024 introduced this function, and then I'd be done. Okay, but what is modern in the context of this? So when I look at it from my perspective now, of course, this is modern. But I still would consider reduce modern, so it's not really outdated or something. And even for off looping is not that really outdated. And there may potentially be scenarios, performance related or something like this, where it would make sense to use this other kind of for loop. So, but actually, I haven't seen this for style loop in a very long time. So it's, yeah, very subjective. When you look at the internet and the sentiment of when you search for modern JavaScript, you will actually find also no real definition, but something that goes back to ES6, basically at the time when, yeah, right after UI5 has been released, and which basically describes the gap of the stuff that, yeah, we're not really used to, or some of us, or many of us, are not really used to do, right? So there have been several new releases of ECMAScript, and if you apply the stuff that has been introduced with those versions, then you will do modern JavaScript. Okay, but that's still very unclear, so I made up my own definition. And it's not actually including those things. So my definition would be modern JavaScript is creating, continuously updating, and applying a holistic understanding of the JavaScript language. So it's not about something that the latest version, the stuff of latest ECMAScript needs to be modern, or that's like modern. No, there are potentially things in the language that have been there for 20 years, and that they are still relevant. I should definitely use them. So the key essence of this is stay up to date, right? Modern, for me at least, means stay up to date, get an understanding of what is there, what has been there in the past, and what additions did come over recently, and know when to use it, right? So if you look back to the coding, I will benefit from this, right? If I just need to write one line of code, then of course I should prefer this solution. Okay, so this was my take on the aspect of modern JavaScript. So the importance of modern JavaScript. Again, like last year, I was heavily focusing on the developer perspective. So what is in for you, right? If you apply, you get the knowledge in those modern JavaScript techniques, and you will save time, and you will be more productive, and things will cost less, and you will be more attractive for other projects because you're very good at what you do. But this time I will actually change the perspective and look from the UI5 perspective. And actually, there has been some really interesting discussion on LinkedIn recently. So I don't know, Tobias Hoffmann, is he in the room? I know that, hi. So he actually brought something up on LinkedIn. So he wrote a blog post stating that UI5 development, your next obsolete skill. And I don't want to discuss I don't want to present my opinion on this, but I thought that this is a real interesting discussion because not only Tobias brought up his opinion on this, but many others jumped in and offered their opinion. Okay, so Tobias basically said that with the rise of Fiori elements and the maturing of Fiori elements and the availability of web components and your sub-built apps, for example, you have multiple options to build front-end applications now. And UI5, coding UI5, is just one option. And again, on the final sentiment of this, that's debatable, but I get the idea. But it's been interesting because others jumped in. Like Mustafa, and he's also in the room. Hey. He actually mentioned something that is adding to this. So there's like, and we talked about this the whole day, right? So we have options now, different options. So potentially it would make sense with UI5 web components around to use frameworks like React, Angular, and Vue. So why not use those frameworks and build the Fiori applications? So why do we need to use UI5? Ryan Fleischman added something that is, I think, really, really important. He actually brought up that UI5 is actually a gateway skill. And it's actually many people from the ABAP world, from the backend side, actually build their, and it's, I really like the term gateway skill because they potentially build their OData service in gateway and then expanded to the front end, and they started learning, I would not say JavaScript, but I would say UI5 and build front-end applications. So we have people on board that are really into the JavaScript ecosystem, that are front-end developers, and they know all this stuff. But we have many people out there that actually their way to JavaScript was actually UI5, and potentially is in many ways still UI5. And if UI5 is not modern, then they won't be modern. Which is, a really, really cool, or not cool discussion, but very important discussion that I experienced for myself. Because then you come in discussions with, let's build an app in some company, okay? And you have potentially your sub guys who can potentially do it, but they build apps in a way that is, very old school, not modern. And then you have people there from other departments that use React, Angular, Vue.js. And they will bring up their frameworks to the table. And then we need to have arguments. And if they bring up their arguments and we kind of lack the arguments that we need, then it's not a good discussion. Also very interesting, from Otto Gold. Actually, he said something that I don't really think it's true. So creativity is not bad. But the sentiment of this is that there needs to be standard. And this even adds to the discussion, right? If I have super front-end developers that can do very good JavaScript and also build people like Wouter Lemaire or something, if you bring them to the table and they let them build their apps, you have very, very cool applications. But those potentially need to be maintained by those guys, right? And that's a gap. And you cannot have a standard with one extreme and the other extreme. Okay, so I agree with Otto. And also Robin van het Hof jumped in, and I also value this opinion because, like, of course we have things like Fiori elements around, but also my experience is that UI5 development, freestyle development is still a thing, or is a big thing. And you cannot, there are very, very many scenarios where it makes sense to use Fiori elements, but there are also very many scenarios where it makes sense to build freestyle applications. And even with React, Angular, and Vue.js around, I still think that UI5 is a super cool framework. And I really, really, like it to be around for a very, very long time. So out of this, I actually get the idea that modern JavaScript should be a core principle for the UI5 core team, but not only for the UI5 core team, or for the ecosystem or the UI5 community, but also for the JavaScript developers and also for those gateway developers, right? So we should all have the same understanding. That's the target we aim for. Okay, so, and again, like the sages said, something that I've shown last year, for us developers, there's actually no holding back now. So that's just something from last year where the UI5 core team introduced that they will like embrace modern UI5, modern JavaScript in the framework with the tooling. And actually, Peter gave an update this morning that we do not only support ECMAScript 22, but also 23 now. So it's set up, the stage is set up, and we just have to go on, right? And actually, that's something that I really liked. I actually looked at the documentation, and I actually have seen this. And there are many places where still there's old school JavaScript around, but you will find this kind of coding in there, and that makes me really happy. All right, so that's on the more theoretical part. ECMAScript features. I had this in last year, and basically that's like not a complete list of things that have been added to the language specification, but it's almost complete, right? Last year we looked at those, okay? And I will add those for this year, okay? Mainly focusing on promises and on arrays. But there are many things related to this list, actually. I think when you initially start to like get into the newest JavaScript stuff, you potentially, and you start with ECMAScript 6, you will find some really important concepts that have been added to the language. And ES6 has been a very, very big release. But if you look at the change list, the changelog over the different versions for each year, then there's not so much added per year. So if you caught up to 2024 or some later or some earlier stages, it's not that much, right? And if you take, I don't know, a few hours a year to actually look up the documentation and check, okay, what's up in JavaScript? Okay, those new functions have been added. Then it's just enough to know. So it's not a really big thing. But if the gap is too wide, then yeah, then it's like a lot of stuff to actually learn. So yes, we will look at something, actually that's a very hard part for me, because I want to talk about something that potentially many of you already know and use on a daily basis. Potentially some of you don't really know what this is, and I have to like find the middle ground to entertain every one of you. So I try to talk about promises in a way that potentially there's something new for everyone here. Okay, promises have been introduced with ECMAScript 6. And by the definition, it's some really, really simple thing. It's basically an object that is representing the state of an asynchronous operation, and it can contain the resulting value of that asynchronous operation, and it can have some reactions, some functions, or some callback functions that will be called once the status of this object is changing. Okay, so per se, that's a very simple thing. But to actually fully understand the impact of promises, I actually brought up some example that I went through back in the days where I wasn't aware promises existed. And the thing is, and that basically motivated me to actually talk about this, is I still see those around, right? So that's not a thing from 2016, but actually in the last 2 years, I faced applications that try to tackle this challenge. And even if you look at some posts in the sub-community, you will find questions like the original OData model, it basically contained this async flag, and it's not available in OData v2 and v4. So how do I do sync requests? And that's something you should not do. But I will tell you why. Yes. And we will actually go a little bit deeper and look at the JavaScript event loop to really understand this. Okay, so if we execute JavaScript in the browser, there's a JavaScript engine that takes care of this. Okay, and one thing that is really important to understand is that even with all the async stuff around, there's only one thread dealing with this. So basically, JavaScript in your browser will only have one call stack. And if it will basically go through your JavaScript step by step and brings something up to the call stack, which will then be executed. And if something is on the call stack, then obviously nothing else can be executed. So that's like blocking JavaScript. Okay, there are certain web APIs. So for example, if I do a request to a web server to actually load data, then there's a web API available in the browser where I can call fetch, for example, and it will then take over and do the request and response handling. So that's not in scope of JavaScript, but that's in scope of the web API. Okay, and it will not block the JavaScript engine. So once the data is finally back, it will then add something to the task queue or to the microtask queue, and then the callback function will sit there and wait to be executed until the call stack is empty. And only then, following this route, things will be added to the call stack and executed. Okay? So that's like the core, a simplified version of how JavaScript works in our browsers. So if I have the requirements that we have, and I did not read it, so basically the requirement is pretty simple. I have a freestyle app. I want to load 2 data sources, and I want to know when both of the requests have been processed, and then I want to continue and do something with the data, okay, which is actually very simple. When I want to do this in a synchronous way, and basically it's stated here that that's for demonstration purpose only, because this read sync actually does not exist. It will work a slightly different way, but you could use Ajax in a, you can actually imitate this in a very similar way. It will basically look like this. So first, the program will start with a console log statement. This will be added to the call stack, and then will be executed, and then it will jump over to the next one. So we will actually call the init model, then we will jump into the init model, and the init model will stay onto the call stack, and then we will reach the read sync method, okay? And it will then generate this XML HTTP request, and it will hand over stuff to the request. But the call stack will still be filled, so it won't free the call stack, and thus it will block the whole JavaScript engine from doing anything. And we do not know, it's not holistic how long the request will take, but someday it will return. Then you have the data available, and then you can continue with the processing. So this will be done for the next line. So we will read the profit centers. Again, we will wait, and then things will return. And then we will move on. So actually, Peter talked about today that they also want to remove additional async stuff, or that basically they want to change everything to async. And that's basically the reason for this, right? So every time we don't do things async, which we potentially do because there would be a web API for this, we are blocking JavaScript. And I've actually seen those applications, and they're not really pleasant to work with, and should not be built like this. And for example, if you actually see those browser windows popping up saying the blah, blah, blah tab is not responding, basically that's an issue, right? Because you're blocking the call stack, and then everything stops. So then we will go through this, and the program will be finished. But the synchronous processing is not a good idea, right? So we will block things, and it's not only a UI5 thing, it's in general in JavaScript not a good idea to use synchronous processing. Okay, so then the most obvious reason, next step would be, okay, then let's go asynchronous, okay? So I changed this piece here, and we're just using OData v2 and just read the state organizations from the backend, okay? So, and we have a callback, and after this is finished, we actually want to set the data to the model. So execution will go like this. So again, we start with the console statement, then we go into the init model. We need to create this model up front. Then we will actually call the read method, right? And the read method will actually create this XML HTTP request. But then it will continue, right? So it will not block. It will just execute, and then stuff will be handed over to the web API, and then it will do the processing. And the JavaScript engine will actually continue. So the next read will be added to the call stack. So we will read the profit centers. And again, we will create an XML HTTP request, and things will continue, and by the end of the method, we will return the model. So by that time, potentially, the first XML HTTP request has presented their response. So the callback that we registered in the success method will be added to the task queue. So there's a specific queue that will actually take the stuff that's been coming back from those requests, and it will be kept in the task queue until the call stack is empty. So we cannot directly execute this. It has to wait, right? So once we step to the next call, console log, the task queue is empty, the call stack is empty, and because the task queue has priority, we will actually execute the stuff that has been inside of the callback function, and we will send that the property. Okay, cool. So we did this. We finally do the console log statement, and then, oh, the program is actually finished, or kind of finished, but we don't have all the data which we actually would like to have. So sometimes, someday, in some minute, some seconds in the future, the other requests would come in, and the same procedure, task queue, then onto the call stack, execute it, and then we are done. But actually, as we've seen, we were not in sync anymore, right? We were too early, so it kind of broke our application as well. Yes, it should be a very simple problem, but it's somehow not so easy to solve. one other potential way of doing this is, okay, we have asynchronous processing. We cannot do this in parallel, so I need to chain things. Okay, and that's what many of you know. Okay, so I actually rewrote this again, and we first read the state organizations, set the state organizations, and then we read the profit centers. Okay, and then after we read the profit centers and the data has been returned, I can finally say that, look, okay, I'm done. Okay, this will actually work, so I have more control over this, but it's actually looking very ugly. And instead of having like a real nice code flow and knowing at this stage that I'm done, I'm actually done at this stage, which is something that people call callback hell. And I think many of us older developers experience this as well. So quickly go through this again. So we start with this, we go into the application, we then execute the first one. It will create the request, but then it will continue, right? And again, this will return sometime. We wait for the call stack to be empty. We add this to the call stack and move on with those requests. Okay, so you get the idea. Okay, so, but still, even if we do this orchestration, it's still not working because we have it under control now, but it's not parallel anymore. So we need to chain this in order to have it under control, right? And again, as I've said this, like the synchronizing of those, the orchestration of this stuff is really messy. And I stumble across, I've written them myself in the past, and I still stumble across those applications that are really, really hard to maintain. And again, all with the mindset that we need to compete with Vue.js and AngularJS and stuff like this. So that's not something that we should discuss here, but I think we need to do. So back to promises. So promises have been introduced to actually solve this issue. Okay. So again, a promise basically is an object that is having a certain state, and that can either be pending, fulfilled, or rejected. Right? And if I initially create this, it will be pending, and then it will be either fulfilled or rejected based on the answer of the asynchronous operation. Okay, so let's, not the last time, but there will be only one more time when we go to the call stack to actually see how the handling of a promise will work in the JavaScript engine. Okay, first of all, we will create a promise. Okay, and potentially that's also something new, hopefully for also those guys who are up to date. ECMAScript 24 introduced a nicer way to actually wrap something in a promise. So you don't need to use the constructor anymore, but there's promise with resolver, which you can like grab the resolve function and the promise from, and I think it's a lot nicer to use than before. Okay, so this will basically create the promise object and set it to a state pending. And then we will actually register something, and those are the fulfill reactions and the reject reaction. So if I call promise then, I will basically register a function that will be executed once the promise will hit the status fulfilled. And in parallel, if I use catch, then I'm trying to react on the state where the promise will be set in a rejected state. Okay, so I would just register this here. So and then I will actually do the read stuff, right? And then we know the procedure. I don't have the XML HTTP request stuff here. So in the background something will happen, and that will be coming back to the task queue. So and then task queue is empty. We will bring it to the call stack, and then we will call a function called resolve. Right? And resolve is a magic function that basically updates the state of the promise to fulfilled. So we know that the async operation that processed in the background is actually fulfilled, and we will actually, the stuff that you put into resolve will actually be stored as the data. So I have this asynchronous state and the result in this object. And what then happens is, whenever I call resolve, the fulfill reaction that I registered will be added to the micro task queue. So in JavaScript, there's a specific queue for promise reactions, okay? Which basically has, I don't have this in an example, but has priority over the task queue. So whenever a promise is resolved and the call stack is empty, this will jump in. Okay, so that's now the case, and then we will jump over, and this will be executed. Okay. So one thing to add, if we would now register another fulfill reaction onto the promise, it would still be added to the fulfill reaction, and then immediately added to the microtask queue because the promise is already in the fulfilled state. Okay, so it's not that it can miss the state change of a promise, but it will actually work the whole time. Okay, so that's very cool. And it basically is the foundation of the solution of our problem. So I look at the time, I need to hurry a little bit. So there are different ways to create such promises, right? So we have seen the newly introduced promise with resolver function, but before you could use a new promise, so basic constructor, and the downside of this is that you are living inside of the anonymous function where you need to deal with resolve and reject. There are also static methods available if you, I never really used this, but if you want to resolve a promise immediately, then you have the chance to do so. Okay, and there's even other stuff, like if I call then to actually register such a fulfill reaction, it will basically return a promise. So I can actually chain those thens and actually always create new promises that will call the next then with the value of the former promise. Okay, that's a way to create promises. And we already learned a little bit about how to handle them, right? So we talked about then. So if I have a promise, I can call then and register this callback. I can call catch to actually react on if something is failing. And there has been something introduced in ES 2018, which is called finally, to actually do something regardless of the state of the promise, right? Either if it failed or succeeded, still be called. So that's one important aspect. And that's like the superpower of promises. We have one asynchronous operation, but the promise API offers ways to deal with multiple promises at once and keep them in sync. So there's promise all, the first example, where I can insert many promises, and promise all will itself return a promise which will only resolve when all the promises resolved. So that's the sync point, right? It will wait until everything's finished, and then I know I'm ready to go. There's been others introduced, like there's promise all settled, for example, that will wait until they responded, right? Even if it's rejected, promise all settled will resolve. And then there's been introduced promise any and promise raise, which basically react on either one promise being resolved or the first promise being resolved and rejected, and then things move forward. Okay, so that's super cool and very flexible. So, and then there's one last thing that we need to add to the table, which is async await. And when I saw that the first time, I did not fully understand it, and I had the fear that, okay, that looks like synchronous programming again. Can I use it? But I will show you. I need to show you quick how this is working. So basically, async await is just syntactic sugar for creating promises, right? And organizing, restructuring your code that it looks synchronous. So I define an async function with the async keyword, and when I do this, it will always return a promise. Even if I just return a string, it will wrap the string in a promise, and the function will, return a promise. If I specify the function as async, I can use await inside of that function. Okay, and basically, this await will pause the execution. It will not really pause. It will not pause the execution on the call stack. We will see this in a second, but it will actually look like I will wait there, and then once the promise is returned, then I just continue. So it looks synchronous, which is super nice. Okay, yes, that's basically our final solution. So again, I have to hurry up a little bit. So that's our final solution. So we'll use promise all. We will have those inner fetches an API that will basically use or return promises, so it's already promisified. It will return promises, promise all will wait, and the await will wait on that again. So it looks synchronous, but it's basically asynchronous. And again, I don't want to go through everything, you've seen this a lot, but I just want to highlight await basically creates another promise. Okay, so when we call await, so we're in the call stack inside this async function, we will call await, then we will create many promises in that scenario. Okay, I just focus on the await promise. So await will create a promise in the state pending. So, and we will basically, and that's something that is, I have not fully understand it, how JavaScript is doing this, but it will actually capture the scope of this async function, and it will capture the stuff that needs to be done after the await, and basically put this in as a fulfill reaction. And that's basically magic. It's just using a promise, but it looks like it's synchronous. So then we will move on, and nothing will block. Things will happen in the background, and once everything is done, we will have the await promise in the status fulfilled with the result and the fulfill reaction, and then things will go on and be executed. So that's basically the magic of promises and how they can solve to help us build great apps. Because if you finally understand promises, then we can actually build applications in a whole different way. So I've seen apps with controllers with 4,000 lines of code and stuff like this. Because all those nested chaining stuff. But if you use promises wisely, it's a superpower. Okay? So that's a simple wrapper. Immediately, if I have to use the ODW2 model and I need to use read, I always build a small wrapper which will promisify that call, and then I can just use it like this. And it's super easy. Another example, which I cannot explain in great detail, but dialogues are example for me from an application perspective that are potentially things that are asynchronous from the user perspective. So in my controller, I just want to have those lines of code. And then I have a dedicated class that are returning a promise and are dealing with resolve eternally and doing all the stuff, grabbing the information from the user, and they just return this once the user had entered the data, and we are done. So that's super, super cool. Actually, I think I have to skip the array functions. So you will find them on the slides. I think arrays are also superpower. Like I remember when I had the need to use things like load dash or _JS, which branded nice JavaScript library to actually deal with arrays. Arrays nowadays in JavaScript are super, super cool. So coming to the end, again, I hopefully have shown you some things you can take with you. And also, I mean, I did go a little bit deep, but sometimes I think it's really important to go deep. And I actually learned a lot by creating those slides because I did not understand everything before. So that's super cool. There are many ways in the internet where you can find additional information. So go ahead and get yourself ready for modern JavaScript. Okay, so I'm at the end of my talk. I did not tell you everything I wanted, but finally, a big thank you.
Can you hear me? Am I audible? Oh, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Mike. I would like to also come up because I think the promises, when I first had a touch point with the promises, was really brain fuck, yeah, honestly. And it took me also a while to really understand that. And I like the way you really made that visible, how promises work, and it's really an essential skill set of all of us to learn how to deal with promises or to deal with asynchronous asynchronous flow in JavaScript or in UI5 applications. And the promises are an awesome tool to help you to deal with that. And while listening to the presentation, and I saw this with resolver, I didn't know that yet. I immediately looked in or thought about the direction of some guys. We need to also enable ES 2024. So this will also simplify a lot on our side. Yeah, I don't know whether we have some more questions.
Yeah, questions. Now we have 2 moderators. Oh, we have one.
But Mike, you
Okay.
have to ask.
You can. Okay.
You are answering. I'm just listening, learning.
Yes. Thanks.
Great session, Mike. You really touched the biggest challenge for every ABAP developer that makes the switch to Fiori. So my question, to UI5, and to JavaScript. My question to you, will you give this session tomorrow as well?
Yes, I will just reduce it to the promise part. Yes. Actually, no, I haven't done it. But
Make a promise that
Thank you.
you promise.
Yes. I cannot make a promise.
You need to fulfill.
Thank you.
Promise all, promise raise, or what?
Yes. I think if I do it, I need to raise, but I don't want to.
So we have a full room. Do we have more questions? Last question of the day, looking at the time. It could be you. Be brave.
You could shine one more time.
Jeremy has one.
Is there a meme on the last slide?
I had one. I had one, but I thought it would be too. So I had one with. I'm explaining it. I had a microphone, and there's drop the.
Drop the mic.
Yes. So, but I thought it would not be funny, so I skipped it.
Don't drop mic. We need more mics here on stage. Yeah. Again, very well done. It was great to have you here. And again, you made a very wonderful session of teaching us what to learn and what you need to know about that. And I think with that, and yeah, all of that, we can close that part. And there is one guy waiting.